When my boss said I wasn't ready for the promotion, I just nodded my head, clocked out at the exact time, and went home. 2 days later, the factory was in chaos, and I had 86 missed calls from the floor. I'm David Miller, 34 years old, and for the past 11 years, I've been the maintenance supervisor at Midwest Manufacturing, an auto parts plant just outside of Detroit. It wasn't the most glamorous job in the world, but it was honest, it paid the bills, and I had earned the respect of almost everyone on the floor. Almost everyone. Thursday morning, the 23rd of March, started like any other. I arrived at 6 o'clock in the morning, an hour before my official shift, because that's how things worked when you were responsible for keeping 120 machines running smoothly. The coffee from the vending machine tasted like wet cardboard, but I drank it anyway while checking the overnight reports. Everything checked out. The hydraulic presses were running at 78% capacity. The CNC lathes had no incidents, and the ventilation system was finally stable after the emergency repairs I'd supervised the weekend before. My phone vibrated. A message from Human Resources. "David, Mr. Sullivan wants to see you in his office at 9 o'clock. Be on time." Mr. Robert Sullivan, my toxic boss for the last 3 years. A 42-year-old man who had arrived at the company with a shiny college degree, family connections and senior management, and absolutely zero practical experience on the production floor. To him, we workers were just numbers on a spreadsheet, problems to be solved, never people. But that morning, I had hope. 6 months ago, I had formally applied for the maintenance manager position, a role that had been vacant since the previous manager retired. I'd been doing that job de facto for years, training new staff, designing the preventive maintenance protocols that had reduced equipment failures by 43%, coordinating with vendors, handling night emergencies, all without the title or the corresponding salary. The week before, the operations director had slapped me on the shoulder after I resolved a major crisis with assembly line number 3. "Good job, David," he'd said. "The company needs people like you in leadership positions." Those words had given me hope that my effort would finally be recognized, that years of workplace betrayal from being overlooked would end. At 5 minutes before 9 o'clock, I knocked on Mr. Sullivan's office door. His secretary, Mrs. Grant, waved me in with a compassionate smile that should have warned me about what was coming. "Have a seat, David," Sullivan said without looking up from his computer. His office was spotless, with framed diplomas on the walls and a view of the shipping yard. From up there, the people on the factory floor looked like busy ants. Maybe that's how he always saw us. I sat in the chair across from his desk, my hands resting on my knees. My work uniform still had grease stains from last night's emergency repair on the hydraulic pump of Press 5. Sullivan wore an impeccable navy blue suit. "I suppose you know why I called you in," he finally said, closing his laptop and looking at me with that expression I'd learned to recognize, condescension disguised as professionalism. "The maintenance manager position," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Exactly. Look, David, I appreciate your dedication. You are a reliable worker. Nobody can deny that." He paused, as if the next words were difficult for him to say, though we both knew they weren't. "But management has decided to bring in an external candidate for this position, someone with the academic credentials and strategic vision that this role requires." The words hung in the air between us. Bring in an outside hire after 11 years, after everything I had built here. The professional and salary injustice I had quietly endured for so long was finally crystallizing in this moment. "May I ask who?" I managed to say, though my voice sounded distant, as if coming from another person. "Mr. Andrew Bell. He's coming from the Chicago plant, highly recommended. Degree from a university in the United States, experience implementing ISO quality management systems. He's exactly the profile we need to modernize operations. I understand, I said, even though I understood nothing. How could I understand that all my years of practical experience, my intimate knowledge of every machine on this floor, my relationship with every technician and operator, was worth nothing compared to an out-of-state degree? Don't take it personally, David. You're simply not ready for that level of responsibility. Maybe in a few years, with some formal training, you can reconsider applying. The way he said it, as if he were doing me a favor by explaining my own limitations, ignited something in my chest. But I shut it down. For now. When does Mr. Bell start? I asked. Monday. I expect you to support him in his transition. No one knows this floor like you do. Your cooperation will be invaluable. There it was, the cherry on top of this professional betrayal. Not only was I being passed over for the job I deserved, but they expected me to train my replacement, to hand over all the knowledge I had accumulated for over a decade. They expected me to smile and be the good soldier I had always been. Of course, I said, standing up. Anything else? That's all. And David, I truly appreciate your professional attitude about this. Many in your place would cause an unnecessary scene. I nodded, walked out of his office, and headed straight to the restroom. I needed a moment. My hands were trembling as I washed them, looking at my reflection in the spotty mirror. 34 years old. 11 years at this company. And I was still, in the eyes of my toxic boss, simply not good enough. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I supervised the maintenance operations with my usual efficiency. I solved a minor issue with the cooling system in Sector B. I approved purchase orders for spare parts we would need next week. Everything was automatic, all while my mind worked on another frequency. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I did something I never did. I clocked out exactly on time. I usually stayed until 7, 8, sometimes even 10 o'clock when there were emergencies. But that day, at 5 o'clock sharp, I swiped my badge through the time clock and walked out the front door. My cell phone started ringing when I was halfway home. The plant number. I ignored it. It rang again. I ignored it again. By the time I reached my 2-bedroom apartment on the north side of the city, I had 7 missed calls. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of anguish, but because I was thinking, calculating, remembering. You see, there was something Mr. Sullivan and all of Midwest Manufacturing Management didn't know. Something I had deliberately kept invisible all these years. My official job was maintenance supervisor. But my real job, the one no one else could do, the one that kept the entire operation running, was much more complex than that. I was the only one who knew the quirks of every machine. The only one who knew that hydraulic press number 7 needed to be recalibrated every 72 exact hours, or it started producing defective parts. The only one who understood that the electrical system in Sector C had a design flaw that required a specific manual reset every single morning. The only one who maintained personal relationships with the 3 critical vendors who gave us priority in emergencies because I had personally resolved their problems in the past. I was the living institutional memory of that floor. And I had kept that information deliberately decentralized, not out of malice, but because there was never time to formally document everything. There was always another emergency, another fire to put out. And now, that accidental decision was about to become my professional revenge. On Friday, I arrived at 6 o'clock as always. I did my morning rounds as always, but with a crucial difference. I didn't do anything extra. I didn't anticipate problems. I didn't make the preventive adjustments I normally made instinctively. I didn't call the vendors to confirm deliveries. I didn't double-check the systems I knew were temperamental. I did exactly what my official job description required, not 1 ounce more. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I clocked out. My cell phone already had 16 missed calls. On Saturday morning, I turned it off completely. It was my official day off, after all. I sat on my balcony with a cup of coffee that didn't taste like wet cardboard, watching the city wake up. And I waited. I didn't have to wait long. On Sunday afternoon, I turned my phone on. The screen nearly froze trying to load all the notifications. 86 missed calls, 43 text messages, 19 WhatsApp messages, all from the floor, from Mr. Sullivan, from the operations director, even one from the general manager who had never contacted me directly before. I read them in chronological order. It was like watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. Friday, 6:15 in the evening. Message from the night shift supervisor, Mark. David, Press 7 is spitting out bad parts. Did you do the recalibration today? I need the protocol urgently. Friday, 7:30 in the evening. Missed call from Mr. Sullivan. Friday, 8:15 in the evening. Text message from Sullivan. David, I need you to come in. We have production issues. Friday, 9:20 in the evening. Missed call from the operations director. Friday, 10 o'clock, 5 minutes in the evening. WhatsApp from Mark. Bro, where are you? We've shut down line 3 completely. The Honda client is waiting for 5,000 parts early tomorrow. Urgent. Saturday, 5:30 in the morning. Missed call from Sullivan. Then another and another. Saturday, 6:15 in the morning. Message from the operations director. David, I understand it's your day off, but we need your help. Critical situation. Saturday, 7:30 in the morning. Missed call from the general manager. Saturday, 9:40 in the morning. WhatsApp from Robert, one of the senior technicians. Boss, everything is falling apart. No one knows what to do. Please call. Saturday, noon. Text message from Sullivan. And this one made me smile. David, I know it's the weekend, but I need you to come in. I'll pay you double time. Sector C is completely down. Nobody knows how to reset the electrical system. Vendors aren't answering. It's a disaster. Saturday, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Missed call, another one and one more. Saturday, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Message from the general manager. Mr. Miller, we need to discuss the situation at the plant. Please contact me immediately. Sunday, 8 o'clock in the morning. WhatsApp from Mark. David, they just called Mr. Bell to come in from Chicago. He's arriving tomorrow morning instead of Monday. This is bad, bro. I've never seen Sullivan this desperate. That gave me pause. They had called in my replacement on emergency 2 days before his official start date. Perfect. Let the engineer with the out-of-state degree and ISO experience prove his worth by tackling a factory floor in flames without knowing absolutely anything about its actual operation. But the message that truly grabbed my attention arrived Sunday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It was from Mrs. Grant, Sullivan's secretary. She had never contacted me outside of work hours before. David, sorry to write to you. I know it's not my business, but I overheard Mr. Sullivan talking with the director. They're considering hiring emergency outside consultants. The cost would be approximately $200,000 per week until the production crisis is resolved. They also mentioned potential lawsuits from customers for failure to deliver. The amount could reach millions. Please, if you can help, do it. Many of us here depend on the company not shutting down. I closed the messages and stared at my apartment ceiling. $200,000 per week on consultants. Potential multi-million-dollar lawsuits. All because Mr. Sullivan had decided I wasn't ready for a position I was already performing without proper recognition or compensation. The workplace betrayal I had suffered was now reflected in the chaos they had created themselves. But something in Mrs. Grant's message made me reconsider my position. She was right. A lot of innocent people on that floor depended on their jobs. Mark, Robert, the technicians, the operators, the secretaries. Hard-working people who had nothing to do with my toxic boss's decision. But I wasn't going to just return and rescue him without consequences either. If they wanted my help, it was going to be on my terms. Monday at 6 o'clock in the morning, I pulled into the Midwest manufacturing parking lot. Several management cars were already there, which was unusual for that hour. The night shift usually had the lot nearly empty by then. When I entered the plant, the scene was surreal. 3 out of the 5 production lines were completely halted. In Sector C, I saw 4 technicians staring bewildered at the electrical control panel, clearly having no idea how to proceed. Press 7 had an out-of-service sign and a pile of defective parts stacked beside it. The noise level was strange, too quiet where there should have been the roar of machinery. Mark saw me first. He practically ran toward me. "David, thank God, this has been a nightmare. Everything started failing Friday night. Press 7, the electrical system. The lathes in Sector B are making a weird noise that no one can identify. The new manager arrived an hour ago and is locked in the office with Sullivan and the director. I think they're trying to contact consultants, but no one can come until Wednesday." "And the vendors?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "No one's answering, or they say they can't make emergency deliveries this week. I don't know what happened, David. They always gave us priority." Of course they always gave us priority. Because I had personally cultivated those relationships for years. I had helped Mr. Thompson, the owner of North Industrial Supplies, when his own shop had a crisis. I had recommended the son of Mr. Garcia, the hydraulic systems manager, for a job at another plant. I had been the godfather to the daughter of my contact at Specialty Electronics. These weren't standard commercial relationships that could be transferred with a memo from Human Resources. They were personal relationships built on years of mutual trust. "David," Mr. Sullivan's voice sounded from behind me. I turned around. He looked terrible. Deep circles under his eyes, his tie loose, coffee stains on his previously impeccable shirt. "I need to talk to you, now." I followed him to his office. Inside were the operations director, a man in his late 50s named Henry Wallace, and a young guy I presumed was Mr. Andrew Bell, my supposed replacement. Bell looked lost and miserable, clearly aware that he had been thrown into an impossible situation. "David," Sullivan began, and I noticed his tone had completely changed from last Thursday. There was no more condescension, just barely controlled desperation. "We need your help. The entire weekend has been a disaster. Production is practically halted. Customers are calling constantly. Honda threatened to cancel the contract if we don't deliver today. That's 23% of our annual revenue." I stood there, arms crossed, waiting. I didn't say anything. Director Wallace cut in. "David, I know the decision about the manager position must have been disappointing for you. But we need to put that aside now and focus on saving the operation. Can you help us?" "Disappointing?" I repeated the word, letting it hang in the air. That's an interesting way to describe 11 years of unrecognized work, of emergencies solved at 3 o'clock in the morning, of sacrificed weekends, of accumulated knowledge that apparently isn't worth anything compared to an out-of-state college degree. Sullivan went pale. Bell looked at the floor. "It's not that your work isn't valued," Wallace tried. "Isn't it?" I interrupted him, and my voice was harsher than I intended. But I was tired of being the nice guy. On Thursday, I was told I wasn't ready to be manager, that I needed formal training, that you would bring in someone with the right credentials. And now, 4 days later, You need me to save the operation I'm supposedly not qualified to manage. Explain the logic of that. The silence in the office was absolute. Finally, it was Bell who spoke. "You're right," his voice said, young but firm. "I came here thinking I knew manufacturing systems. I have a master's degree from MIT in industrial engineering. I've implemented ISO systems in 3 plants. But I walked onto that floor this morning and realized I know nothing about how this place actually runs. The manuals are outdated, the diagrams don't match the current configuration, and every person I ask says the same thing. Ask David. Only he knows how that really works." There was an honesty in his words that I appreciated. At least he was smart enough to recognize his own ignorance. "How much time do we have before Honda cancels?" I asked. "We have to deliver 5,000 parts before 6 o'clock in the evening," Sullivan replied. "It's 6:30 in the morning now, 11 and a half hours. And the other lines? Ford needs their delivery by Wednesday, Nissan by Friday. But if we lose Honda, the company probably won't survive to fulfill those deliveries anyway." I did my calculations mentally. It was possible, but tight, very tight, and only if everything went perfectly. "All right," I finally said. "I'll help, but with conditions." Sullivan and Wallace exchanged glances. I could see the relief mixed with apprehension on their faces. Bell simply nodded, as if he already knew this would come at a price. "What conditions?" Wallace asked, his voice cautious. I sat down in one of the chairs across from Sullivan's desk. If we were going to negotiate, we would do it as equals, not with them looking down at me. "First condition. I want the maintenance manager position, the official title, the corresponding salary, retroactive to when the position became vacant 6 months ago. That includes the performance bonuses I should have been receiving." Sullivan opened his mouth to protest, but Wallace raised a hand to stop him. "Continue," the director said. "Second condition. Complete autonomy over my department. I decide which vendors we use, which technicians I hire, which procedures we implement. No interference from upper management, unless I specifically request your input." "That's quite irregular," Sullivan began, but his voice no longer had its previous authority. "More irregular than hiring outside consultants for $200,000 a week," I countered. "More irregular than losing a multi-million-dollar contract with Honda? You came to me because I'm the only one who can fix this. These are my terms for doing it." "Third condition," I continued before they could respond. "Mr. Bell stays, but as my assistant director, not my replacement. He has credentials that I don't, knowledge of systems that could be valuable. I have practical experience that he needs. We will work together, but the final decision is mine." Bell looked at me in surprise, then nodded slowly. I think he expected me to throw him out, but he wasn't the enemy here. He was just another victim of Sullivan's poor management. Fourth and final condition. I want a formal apology. In writing, acknowledging that the initial decision was an error in judgment that did not adequately value my experience and contributions to this company. Sullivan's face turned red. His pride was being torn apart piece by piece, and we both knew it. But we also knew he had no choice. Wallace stood up and walked over to the window that overlooked the paralyzed factory floor. I could see his mind working, calculating costs, considering alternatives, inevitably reaching the conclusion that there were no real alternatives. "All right," he finally said, turning back to me. "I accept all your conditions. I'll prepare the documents today. But David, I need to know, can you fix this, truly?" I stood up, smoothing down my work uniform that suddenly felt like victorious armor. "Give me 3 hours, but I need to be left alone to work without interruption. No managers breathing down my neck. No constant updates. Trust me to do what you should have trusted me to do from the beginning. I headed down to the floor with Belle following me. Mark and the other technicians immediately gathered around, their faces full of hope and relief. "All right. Listen up, everyone," I said, raising my voice so everyone could hear over the partial noise of the machinery that was still running. "We have 11 hours to produce 5,000 parts for Honda. It's tight, but it's possible. Mark, gather the entire day shift team. I need everyone here, including those who are normally off today. Pay them overtime. That's already authorized." Mark nodded and ran off toward his phone. "Robert," I called to the senior technician who had been with me since my first days. "You and I are going to press 7. It needs the special recalibration, the one only we know. 23 exact minutes with the protocol we never formally documented." "Got it, boss." I turned to Belle. "You're coming with me. You're going to learn exactly how this really works, not what the manuals say." Over the next 2 hours, the factory floor transformed. First, we fixed press 7. Belle watched, fascinated, as Robert and I executed a sequence of adjustments that looked random, but which I had perfected over years of trial and error. Every machine had its personality, its quirks. This particular press needed to be recalibrated in a specific order, with precise pauses between each step, or the sensors would get confused and produce out-of-tolerance parts. "Why 23 minutes?" Belle asked as we waited for the press to complete its recalibration cycle. "Because 25 minutes overheats the hydraulic system," I explained. 20 minutes doesn't complete the sensor self-check cycle. 23 is the sweet spot. I figured that out after 3 months of intermittent failures that no one else could diagnose. And is that documented somewhere? "It is now," I said, pointing to his tablet. "You're writing everything down, right? That's going to be your first project as assistant director. Documenting all this tacit knowledge that exists only in my head and in the heads of the senior technicians. Next stop, the electrical system in Sector C. This one was tricky. The original design had a flaw that no one had wanted to fix properly, because it required shutting down all production in the sector for 2 full days. Instead, I had developed a workaround that involved a manual reset every morning in a specific sequence of switches. "Watch," I told Belle as my hands moved over the controls. "Main breaker down. Wait 5 seconds. Not 4, not 6. 5. Secondary switch 2 up. Switch C up. Now B. It has to be after C or the safety fuse trips. Wait 10 seconds. Now the main one up again. See that green light? When it blinks 3 times, the system is ready. If it blinks 2 or 4 times, we have a problem." The light blinked 3 times. Sector C sprang to life with a familiar hum. "This is incredible," Belle murmured, writing frantically, "and completely non-standardized. How have you kept all this running by yourself?" "I haven't done it by myself," I replied. "Robert, Mark, some of the senior technicians, they all know parts of this. But yes, I'm the only one who knows the complete system. Which, now that I think about it out loud, was pretty stupid of me. If something had happened to me, this plant would have collapsed. That's why documentation is critical," Belle said. And I saw something in his eyes that I liked. Genuine respect. It's not about not trusting practical experience. It's about ensuring that experience can be shared and preserved. Maybe this guy and I could work well together after all. The next few hours were a frantic ballet of repairs, adjustments, and coordination. I personally called my contacts at the vendors. With North Industrial Supplies, I spoke to Mr. Thompson, the owner. "David, son, where have you been?" he said. "Your company has been calling us all weekend, but I didn't recognize the numbers." "I know, Mr. Thompson. There were some changes in management. But I'm still here, and I need your help. It's urgent. For you, anything you need. What do you require? 2 hours later, we had the critical spare parts we needed, delivered personally by Mr. Thompson, something he would never have done for a cold call from an unknown purchasing manager. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, all 5 lines were operating, not at 100% capacity, but well enough. The technicians worked with renewed efficiency, motivated by seeing that things were finally being fixed. Bell shadowed me across the floor, absorbing everything like a sponge. He asked good questions, took detailed notes, and most importantly, he didn't try to impress me with his theoretical knowledge. He was genuinely there to learn. At 4:30, I made my final calculations. Mark approached with the production report. "We're going to make it, boss. If we keep this pace, we'll have the 5,000 parts ready by 5:30. Plenty of time to package them and load the truck for Honda." I felt a surge of relief mixed with satisfaction. My professional revenge hadn't been destructive. It had been constructive. I had demonstrated my value exactly when they needed me most, on my own terms. At 5:40, the Honda truck pulled out of the parking lot with its full load. The silence in the factory was replaced by applause and shouts of celebration. The technicians hugged each other. Some even had tears in their eyes. They had been working in a panic for 3 days, unsure if the plant would survive. I went up to Sullivan's office. He, Wallace, and now also the general manager, a man named Franklin Gibbs, were gathered there. All 3 stood up when I entered. "You did it," Gibbs said, extending his hand. "We just received confirmation from Honda. They're satisfied with the delivery." I shook his hand, but I didn't smile. This shouldn't have gotten to this point. "You're right," Wallace admitted. He placed several documents on the desk. "These are the papers you requested. Maintenance manager contract, adjusted salary retroactive to 6 months, complete departmental autonomy. It's all here." I reviewed the documents carefully. Everything was as I had asked. I signed where necessary. "And the other thing?" I asked, looking directly at Sullivan. He pulled out a letter printed on company letterhead. I took it and read, "Dear David Miller, the management of Midwest Manufacturing hereby recognizes that the initial decision not to promote you to the position of maintenance manager was an error in judgment that did not adequately value your experience, knowledge, and critical contributions to the operations of this company." It continued for 2 more paragraphs, all formally acknowledging what I already knew, but needed them to admit. At the bottom were the signatures of Sullivan, Wallace, and Gibbs. I carefully folded the letter and put it in my shirt pocket. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was validation. It was the recognition of 11 years of workplace betrayal finally exposed and corrected. "One more thing," Gibbs said, his expression serious. "We need to ensure this never happens again. Not just the production crisis, but the situation that caused it. David, I want you to work directly with me to restructure how we manage operational knowledge in this plant." "You're right," I agreed. "Too much depends on one person. That's a risk we can't keep taking." "Mr. Bell and I have already started," I said. "He's documenting everything we did today. But it's going to take time. We're talking about 11 years of accumulated knowledge." "Take all the time you need," Gibbs replied. "And David, if there's anything else you need for your department, resources, staff, equipment, you just have to ask. I think this weekend taught us all the true value of your work." I looked at Sullivan. He hadn't said a word since I walked in. His face was a carefully neutral mask, but I could see the humiliation in his eyes. My toxic boss no longer had power over me. "Mr. Sullivan," I said, deliberately formal. "Anything you'd like to add?" He cleared his throat. "Just that I made a mistake and I'm sorry. They weren't the most eloquent words, but coming from a man whose ego had been his defining characteristic, they meant something. I didn't forgive him, not completely, but it was enough for now. Good, I said. Then I suggest we all go home and get some sleep. Tomorrow, we need to make sure the Ford and Nissan deliveries go out on time too. But when I went down to the floor to make the end-of-shift announcement, I encountered an unexpected scene. Someone had brought beer, several technicians had ordered pizza, and an impromptu celebration was in progress. Mark saw me and shouted, "There's the boss, the man who saved our jobs!" There was applause, whistling, shouts of approval. I felt awkward with the attention, but also deeply moved. These people had been terrified of losing their jobs, of not being able to feed their families. And now they were celebrating, not just because the crisis had passed, but because they finally had a leader who understood their work from the inside. "Listen up," I said, raising my hands for silence. "Today was tough. This weekend was tough, but we made it because every single one of you knows your job. I just coordinated what you already knew how to do. That doesn't change tomorrow, or next month, or next year. We're still a team. And as a team, we're going to make some changes around here." "What kind of changes?" Robert asked. "First, we're going to document everything. Every procedure, every quirk of every machine, every workaround we've developed. Mr. Bell is going to help us with that. And not because I don't trust you, but because if any of us gets sick, goes on vacation, or God forbid, something worse, the rest of us need to be able to carry on." There were murmurs of approval. "Second, I'm implementing a cross-training program. Every technician is going to learn not just their area, but at least 2 other areas. That means more growth opportunities for you and more security for the operation. Third," I continued, "I'm going to fight for better wages for all of you. I can't promise you how much or when, but now that I have real authority, I'm going to use it. You deserve to be fairly compensated for your experience and dedication." The applause was louder this time. I saw tears in some eyes. Salary injustice wasn't just my problem. It was the problem of everyone on this floor who had given more than they were paid for years. Bell approached me with 2 beers, offering me one. "That was a good speech," he said. "And thank you for not firing me today. I know you would have been within your rights." "You weren't the problem," I replied, taking a sip. "Besides, your skills can be useful. You just need to apply them in the right way, with respect for the knowledge that already exists here." "I get it now," he said, looking around the floor. "At MIT, they taught me that systems are the most important thing. But they didn't teach me that systems are created, maintained, and improved by people and that without understanding those people, without earning their trust, any system you implement is destined to fail." "Welcome to the real world," I said with a smile. "I have a question," he said after a moment. "Did you know this was going to happen? Did you know everything was going to fall apart without you?" I thought carefully before answering. I knew there was a lot of tacit, undocumented knowledge. I knew I was the connection point between a lot of different pieces. Did I know it would be this catastrophic, this fast? Not exactly, but I wasn't surprised either. And was the plan always to come back and fix it? "The plan was to let them face the consequences of their decision," I said honestly. "But when I saw how many innocent people were going to suffer, people who had nothing to do with passing me over for the promotion, I decided I couldn't let that happen. My professional revenge wasn't to destroy the company. It was to force them to recognize my value on my own terms." "That's pretty mature," Bell admitted. "Or pretty calculated," I countered with a wry smile. "Depends on how you look at it." The celebration continued for another hour, before everyone finally began heading home. I was the last to leave, doing my final round to make sure everything was shut down and secured properly. As I walked through the silent floor, the sleeping machines looked different somehow. They weren't just industrial equipment anymore. They were my responsibility, my domain, the kingdom I had saved and would now govern properly. My phone vibrated, a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "David, it's Franklin Gibbs. I just wanted you to know that I had a long conversation with the board of directors this afternoon. There are going to be more changes in management in the coming weeks. Changes I think you'll like. Talk tomorrow. Get some rest." Intriguing. I wondered what that meant. More changes? At what level? I drove home with the windows down, letting the cool night air clear my head. It was strange. After 11 years of feeling invisible and undervalued, suddenly being the center of attention, going from the reliable but ignored employee to the indispensable savior. When I got to my apartment, I didn't go straight to sleep as planned. Instead, I sat at my small desk and took out the letter of apology that Sullivan had signed. I read it again, slowly, savoring every word. Then I opened my laptop and started writing. A detailed plan for the next 6 months, procedure documentation, training programs, emergency protocols, performance evaluations, everything a true maintenance manager should have in place. I worked until 2 o'clock in the morning, the words flowing more easily than they had in years, because now I wasn't writing as the invisible guy doing unacknowledged extra work. I was writing as someone with real authority, with the ability to make real changes. My phone rang. I thought about ignoring it, but when I saw the name on the screen, I answered. "Dad? David, son. I know it's late, but your mother and I just heard about what happened at your work this weekend. Your Aunt Clara, the one who works in human resources at the plant, told us. Are you okay?" My father was a retired mechanic. He had worked with his hands his entire life. He had valued hard work and practical skill over degrees and credentials. He had always supported me, even when others questioned my decision to work in manufacturing instead of going to college. "I'm fine, Dad. Better than fine, actually. I finally got that promotion I should have had months ago. I'm glad, son. But more than that, I'm glad you stood your ground. Your mother and I have always told you, know your worth and don't let anyone make you feel less than. Sounds like you finally did." "Yeah," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. "I finally did." "We're proud of you, David. We always have been, but especially now. Get some rest." After hanging up, I stared at my laptop screen, the words blurred by something in my eyes. 11 years. 11 years of feeling like I wasn't good enough, of wondering if maybe Sullivan was right, if maybe I needed more formal education, more credentials, more of something I couldn't define. And now, finally, I knew the truth. It wasn't that I wasn't good enough. It was that they hadn't been wise enough to recognize what they had. The following days were a whirlwind of activity and change. We met the Ford and Nissan deliveries without a hitch. The production lines operating with an efficiency we hadn't seen in months. But the most interesting things weren't happening on the floor. They were happening in the offices upstairs. On Wednesday afternoon, Gibbs called me to his office. When I arrived, I found not only him, but 2 board members I recognized from annual meetings, Ms. Patricia Harrison and Mr. Marcus Ross. "David, thank you for coming," Gibbs said, indicating a chair. "We want to talk to you about something important." I sat down, curious but cautious. Meetings with the board of directors were never casual. "We've been reviewing what happened last weekend," Ms. Harrison began. "Not just the production crisis, but what caused it. And we've reached some worrying conclusions about how this plant has been managed. The problem goes beyond Mr. Sullivan," Mr. Ross continued. Although his error in judgment was serious, it's a symptom of a larger problem. A fundamental disconnect between management and real operations. We've been promoting and hiring too much based on academic credentials and not enough on demonstrated practical experience. Therefore, Gibbs intervened, we've made some decisions. First, Mr. Sullivan is being transferred to our El Paso plant. He will remain an engineer, but in a role that does not involve direct supervision of operational personnel. I felt no particular satisfaction with that news. Sullivan had learned a tough lesson, and that was enough. I didn't need to see him destroyed. Second, Gibbs continued, we're restructuring the plant hierarchy. From now on, you will report directly to the operations director, not an intermediate engineer, and you will be involved in all major decisions affecting the floor operations. And third, Ms. Harrison leaned forward, we want you to be part of a pilot program we're launching across all our plants. It's called Shop Floor Leadership. The idea is to identify personnel with your type of practical experience in each of our 6 plants and give them real leadership opportunities, not just empty titles. What would that entail for me specifically? I asked. In addition to your current role, you would work with the maintenance managers of our other plants, Ross explained. You would share best practices. You would help identify similar problems before they become crises, and basically serve as a sort of mentor to others in positions similar to where you were a week ago. There would also be travel, Gibbs added. Maybe 1 week a month visiting other plants. And of course, additional compensation for the expanded responsibilities. It was tempting, very tempting. But something else was on my mind. And Mr. Bell? I asked. If I'm going to be away 1 week a month, I need someone here who can handle things. That would be his responsibility, Gibbs confirmed. With your remote supervision, of course. Do you think he can handle it? I thought about the last week working with Bell. His humility to learn, his work ethic, his genuine respect for practical experience. Yes, I finally said. I think he can. He has a lot to learn still, but he's willing to learn it. And that's what matters. Excellent, Ms. Harrison said, smiling. So, are you interested in this opportunity? Let me think about it, I replied. It's a lot of change very quickly. A week ago, I was told I wasn't ready to be manager. Now you're offering me influence over 6 plants. I need to make sure I'm doing this for the right reasons. Gibbs nodded with approval. That's exactly the kind of measured response I expected. Take the time you need. But David, I want you to know something. The reason we're doing all this isn't just because you saved our butts on Monday. It's because we finally realized we've been ignoring the most valuable kind of leadership there is. The leadership that comes from truly knowing how to do the job. That night, I drove home to my parents' house for the first time in weeks. My mother made my favorite meal, a roast turkey with mashed potatoes, and the 3 of us sat around the kitchen table where I had grown up. So, tell us everything, my mother said after serving the plates. Clara gave us some details, but we want to hear it from you. I told them the whole story. The denial of the promotion, my decision to let them see what happened without me, the crisis, my return on my own terms, and now this new opportunity. My father listened in silence, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me with that expression I'd known since childhood. The one that meant he was about to share some hard-won wisdom. Son, do you remember when you were 16 and wanted to drop out of school to work with me at the mechanics shop? I nodded. It had been a difficult time. I was frustrated with school. I felt like I wasn't learning anything useful. I told you no, my father continued. I told you to finish high school, to learn everything you could. Not because I thought you were stupid or that working with your hands was inferior, but because I wanted you to have options so that no one could box you in just because you didn't have a piece of paper. I remember, I said, but I also told you something else. I told you that real knowledge, the kind that matters, comes from doing things, from getting your hands dirty, from failing and learning from those failures. And that, he said, pointing with his fork, that's what you have now. 11 years of real knowledge that no university can teach. Your father is right, my mother added. But I also think this new opportunity is important, not just for you, but for others like you. How many people are out there, in shops, factories, and stores, doing incredible work but never recognized because they don't have the right degrees? It's systemic workplace betrayal, I said quietly. Not just against me, but against everyone who truly makes things work. Exactly, my mother said. And now you have the chance to change that, not just in your plant, but in others. It's a big responsibility, David. She was right. They were both right. This was bigger than my ego or my professional revenge. It was an opportunity to change a broken system. On Friday, I gave Gibbs my answer. I accepted the expanded role, but with an additional condition. I wanted part of the program to include formal training for shop floor leaders, not to replace their practical experience, but to complement it with management skills, communication, and strategic planning. That sounds perfect to me, Gibbs said. In fact, there's a local university that's interested in partnering with us to create exactly that kind of program. Certifications that recognize both practical experience and management skills. That afternoon, Belle and I sat in my new office. Yes, I now had a real office, not just a cubicle in the corner of the floor, to plan the coming months. I need you to understand something, I told him. When I'm gone a week a month, you are in charge, completely in charge. There will be emergencies you'll have to handle without me. Are you ready for that? Honestly, I don't know, he admitted. But I want to be. I've learned more this week than in 2 years of my master's degree. And it's not just about the machines or the processes. It's about the people. About earning their trust. About understanding that every worker on that floor has valuable knowledge if you bother to listen. Good, I said. Because that's going to be your first test. There's a mechanic on the night shift named George. He's 52 years old, never finished high school. But he can diagnose problems in the hydraulic system just by the sound. The others call him the machine whisperer. I want you to spend the next 2 weeks working with him, learning from him, and documenting his knowledge. Why him specifically? Because George is considering retiring in 2 years, and when he does, all that knowledge goes with him, unless we do something about it. He's exactly the kind of salary injustice and lack of recognition we're trying to change. Belle nodded, taking notes. And what about the rest of the team? How do we handle the transition when you're not here? I've already spoken to Mark and Robert. They're going to be your primary contacts. Mark is better with logistics and planning. Robert is the one you call when there's a real technical crisis. Between the 3 of you, you can handle almost anything. And if something comes up that you really can't manage, you call me. No matter the hour, no matter where I am. 6 months later, I found myself standing on a stage in front of 200 people in the auditorium of Midwest Manufacturing's headquarters plant. It was the official launch ceremony for the shop floor leadership program, and I had been invited to give the keynote speech. I looked out at the audience, managers from all the plants, members of the board of directors, and most importantly, shop floor workers from each of our 6 locations. People with calloused hands and work uniforms, People who knew what it meant to truly make things work. 6 months ago, my voice amplified by the microphone began. My boss told me I wasn't ready for a promotion. And in that moment, I felt invisible. I felt like 11 years of hard work, of sleepless nights solving emergencies, of accumulated knowledge meant nothing. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. I could see faces nodding, people who clearly identified with that experience. But then something happened. I stopped being invisible exactly when the company needed me most, and I had to make a decision. Would I use that moment for destructive revenge, or to create real change? I chose change, I said, because I realized my story wasn't unique. All of you, I motioned toward the audience, have similar stories. Moments where your experience was ignored, where someone with a degree but no practical experience was put above you, where your knowledge was taken but unacknowledged. I saw George in the third row, the machine whisperer, now officially recognized as a senior hydraulic systems specialist with a 30% salary increase. Next to him was Carmen from the El Paso plant, a master welder who had been overlooked for promotions for 15 years until our program identified her. This program, I continued, is not just about giving people nice titles. It's about recognizing that the true value in any organization comes from the people doing the work. And it's about making sure those people have the opportunities, the compensation, and the respect they deserve. In these 6 months, we have identified 43 people in our plants who, like me, were doing managerial-level jobs without the title or the pay. Today, all of them have been formally promoted. Additionally, we have launched 25 knowledge documentation programs, ensuring that critical expertise no longer lives only in the heads of individuals, but is shared and preserved. The applause started, timidly at first, then growing to fill the auditorium. But I raised a hand for silence. But we're not finished. This is just the beginning. Because real change doesn't happen with one program or one ceremony. It happens when we fundamentally change how we value people. When we stop seeing college degrees as the only kind of credential that matters. When we recognize that practical experience, tacit knowledge, the skill earned through years of hard work, that is also education, perhaps the most valuable of all. After the ceremony, Gibbs called me aside along with Ms. Harrison. "Excellent speech, David," Gibbs said, "and we have something more to discuss with you. The board is so impressed with the results of the first 6 months that they want to expand the program, not just within our company, but by offering it as a consulting service to other manufacturing companies." "And you want me to lead that?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "We want you to consider a new role," Ms. Harrison said. "Director of Operational Talent Development. It would be an executive-level role, working directly with the CEO, helping not just our plants, but other companies to identify and develop their internal shop floor talent." It was exactly the kind of opportunity I had never dreamed of, because I didn't even know it existed. But now I had to think carefully. "And my plant?" I asked. "Detroit?" "Mr. Bell has proven to be more than capable," Ms. Harrison said. "The last 3 months you've been traveling, he's managed everything perfectly, including a production crisis last week that he resolved without even calling you." That made me smile. Bell had learned well. More importantly, he had learned to respect and value the knowledge of the people on the floor. "Can I think about it over the weekend?" I asked. "Of course," Gibbs replied. "But David, I want you to know that, regardless of your decision, you have already fundamentally changed this company. That is something you should be proud of." That night, I drove back to Detroit. Instead of going straight home, I stopped by the plant. It was almost midnight, but the night shift was in full operation. I parked and walked up to the fence surrounding the floor, looking at the bright lights through the windows, listening to the familiar roar of the machinery. My phone rang. It was Belle. "David? I'm checking the security cameras, and I see your car in the parking lot. Everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Andrew. Just needed to see the place. How are things going?" "Smooth as silk. Mark just finished the preventive maintenance on Press 7. George identified a potential problem in the hydraulic system of Sector B before it turned serious. And we just completed an advanced batch for the Toyota client." "Sounds like you don't need me," I said. And there was no bitterness in my voice, just satisfaction. "We do need you," Belle corrected. "Just in a different way now, as a mentor. As the person who taught us that true leadership comes from lifting others up, not from accumulating power. And honestly, I think you're ready to lift up more people, a lot more. Do you think I should take the executive role? I think you should do what makes you happy. But I also think you have the opportunity to change the lives of thousands of people who are where you were 6 months ago. That's pretty powerful." We hung up and I stared at the factory floor a little longer. Belle was right. I had gone from being invisible to being seen. From being belittled to being valued. From experiencing workplace betrayal to receiving real recognition. But more importantly, I had learned something about my professional revenge. The best revenge wasn't destructive. It was constructive. It was using your moment of power not to destroy those who hurt you, but to build something better for those who came after. That, I realized, was the sweetest professional revenge of all. On Monday morning, I gave Gibbs my answer. I accepted the executive role with one condition. I wanted George, the machine whisperer, to be hired as a part-time special program consultant, allowing him to both work and formally share his knowledge before retiring. "Done," Gibbs said, extending his hand. 2 weeks later, I was in my new office at the corporate headquarters when I received an unexpected email. It was from Mr. Sullivan, writing from El Paso. "David," the email said, "I know I have no right to contact you, and you can ignore this if you want. But I needed to tell you something. These months in El Paso, without direct supervisory power, have been the most educational of my career. I've had to really work with people, not just give them orders. And I've realized how much I didn't know, how much I ignored, how much damage I did with my arrogance. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that the change you started didn't just change you, it changed me too. I'm taking a humble leadership course. I'm learning to listen. And when I see news about the program you developed, I feel something strange. Pride mixed with shame. Pride that someone who worked under my supervision is doing such important things. Shame that I almost destroyed your career due to my own insecurity. Thank you for not destroying me when you had the chance. And thank you for teaching me, even unintentionally, what true leadership means. Robert Sullivan. I read the email twice. I wasn't sure what to say, but I filed it in a special folder, one I called Lessons Learned. A year after the day I clocked out at 5 o'clock and let the floor collapse, I was standing on a very different stage. It was the auditorium of a national manufacturing convention, and I was the keynote speaker. The real value of any organization, I told the 1,000 people in the audience, is not in its buildings, its machines, or even its products. It's in the collective knowledge of its people. And if you don't recognize, value, and nurture that knowledge, especially the kind that comes from practical experience, more than from academic degrees, you are leaving your most valuable asset untapped. My story isn't special. It's the story of millions of workers around the world who are the true experts in their fields, but never get the recognition they deserve. The difference is that I had a moment where I could dramatically prove my worth. Most people don't get that moment. That's why it's our responsibility, as leaders, to create systems that recognize and value their experience before a crisis hits. After the speech, dozens of people approached, plant managers looking to implement similar programs, shop floor workers sharing their own stories of workplace betrayal and asking how they could create change, consultants wanting to learn more about our methods. And in the middle of the crowd, I saw a familiar face. It was my father, now 68 years old, with tears in his eyes. "I'm proud of you, son," he said when he finally reached the front. "Not just for what you've achieved, but for how you achieved it. With integrity, with respect for others, by lifting people up instead of stepping on them." "I learned it from you, Dad," I replied, hugging him. "You taught me that honest work has inherent dignity, that calloused hands are just as valuable as framed diplomas. I just had to remind the world." That night, alone in my hotel room, I reflected on the journey of the last year. From invisible supervisor to recognized manager, to executive director, to a national voice for underestimated operational talent. It hadn't been revenge in the traditional sense. I hadn't destroyed Sullivan or sunk the company. Instead, I had used my moment of leverage to create something better, to change a broken system, to ensure that the next person in my position wouldn't have to wait 11 years to be seen. And that, I realized, was the sweetest professional revenge of all. What do you think of this story of career triumph? Have you ever felt that your experience and hard work were ignored? How did you handle that situation of salary injustice? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for all the support and for staying with me until the end of this story.